My name is Melissa. I'm 32 years old, and there's one Christmas Eve I'll never forget. That night has stayed in my memory forever. After being away for 3 years, I decided to surprise my family by showing up without telling anyone. I thought it would be a happy reunion. But what I found when I arrived broke my heart. My grandma Helen was sitting outside on the porch in the freezing cold. It was only 31 degrees out, and she was wearing nothing but a thin sweater. Her hands were trembling, her lips turning blue. When I looked through the window, I saw my family inside, sitting around the fireplace. They were dressed up nicely, laughing, sipping champagne, and having the time of their lives. And yet, my grandma, the sweetest woman who ever raised me, was left outside in the cold. I rushed over, lifted her into my arms, and banged on the door. When they opened it, I spoke 6 little words that turned all their faces pale. 6 words that made the whole room freeze. But before I get there, let me take you back so you can understand why my grandma meant so much to me, and why what happened that night cut me so deeply. You see, the bond between my grandma Helen and me was something special, something different. She wasn't just my grandmother, she was my rock. She stepped into my life at a time when I needed someone the most. I was just 8 years old when everything changed. My mom, Caroline, had remarried a man named Victor. He was wealthy, successful, and very focused on appearances. Mum wanted to make him happy no matter what. The problem was, that often meant putting his needs first, before mine. She tried to build her new life with him, but somewhere in the middle of all that, she forgot about me. That's when Grandma Helen quietly stepped in and filled the gap. She gave me the love and attention I wasn't getting at home. Every morning she woke up early to make me breakfast, but it wasn't just any breakfast, she made it fun. She'd shape pancakes into little hearts, or make eggs with silly faces drawn out of ketchup. It always made me laugh before school, and she never forgot to slip a little note into my lunchbox. Something sweet, like I believe in you, or you're stronger than you think. Those tiny notes meant the world to me. When I came home, after school, she was always waiting. She'd greet me with a smile, ask me how my day went, and actually listen to my answers. Not the distracted kind of listening my mum gave me, but real listening. We spent hours together in the kitchen, baking her famous apple pies. The smell would fill the whole house. She'd tell me stories about her younger days while teaching me how to roll the dough just right. Her hands, marked with wrinkles and age spots, guided mine with patience and love. She always said, "Cooking is love you can taste, Melissa. When words don't say enough, a meal speaks for you." Those lessons weren't just about food, they were about life, about resilience, about creativity, about finding joy in taking care of the people you love. Grandma Helen had gone through a lot in her life. She'd lost my grandpa to cancer and raised 3 kids, mostly on her own, yet she carried herself with so much quiet strength and grace. I admired her deeply and wanted to be like her. The difference between her and my mom was impossible to miss. While my mom always seemed rushed, busy, and wrapped up in Victor's world or my younger half-sister Sophie's needs, Grandma Helen gave me her full presence. She showed up for everything. Every school play, every science fair, every parent-teacher meeting that my mum and Victor were too busy to attend. She celebrated every little win in my life, no matter how small. And when I faced failures, she was there to remind me they weren't the end of the world. She'd say, "Every setback is just a step toward something better." I remember when I struggled with algebra in 7th grade. My parents brushed it off, but Grandma used her own savings, what little she had, to hire me a tutor. She told me, "Education is the one thing no one can take away from you." Because of her, I not only caught up, but eventually became great at math. That helped me win scholarships later. During my teen years, she became more than just a grandmother. She was my best friend, my confidant. I could tell her anything, without fear of being judged. when I went through my first heartbreak at 16. I sat crying in her room. She didn't try to rush me or tell me to get over it. She just held me, gave me tissues, and said, "This hurts now. But one day you'll see it's teaching your heart to be stronger, to know its worth. The right person will see the treasure you are." Meanwhile, my relationship with my mum and stepdad was getting worse. Victor only cared about money, appearances, and status. He treated me politely enough in front of others, but behind closed doors, he was cold. His affection was only for Sophie, his biological daughter. She was born 2 years after their marriage, and she quickly became the star of the household. Mum followed Victor's lead, doting on Sophie, and I was expected to be grateful, just for the basics. Whenever I asked for something I needed, like school clothes, it was treated as a burden. But when Sophie wanted fancy things, like designer labels, my mum and Victor turned it into a big shopping spree. Grandma noticed this unfairness, but she handled it quietly. She'd find ways to help me out without stirring up more tension. House was large, a 2-story colonial in an upscale neighborhood. Grandma had her own cozy room on the first floor, complete with her own bathroom, a sitting area, and a beautiful view of the garden she loved so much. She decorated that room with photos, keepsakes, and special items from her past. I spent hours there, listening to her tell stories about each object. There was a music box that played her favorite tune, a quilt sewn by her mother, and shelves filled with old books that carried the smell of time. When I got a full scholarship to a university 300 miles away, it was Grandma who pushed me to go. I was scared of leaving her behind, but she told me, "Your future is waiting for you. Don't hold back for me. I'll be fine. Your success will be my greatest gift." Words gave me courage. At first, I kept my promise to stay close. We called each other almost every day, sharing stories about my classes and her garden. I visited on holidays, and those reunions were precious. But as college got busier, my visits became less frequent. Still, our calls were the thread that tied me back home. Looking back now, I can see that's when things began to shift. Not in big, obvious ways, but little by little. Things I missed because I wasn't there. Things I should have paid more attention to. If only I had noticed sooner. Maybe I could have stopped what happened later. Maybe I could have spared Grandma from the nightmare she ended up living in. After graduation, I landed a great job at a design firm in Chicago. I worked hard, got promoted fast, and by the age of 29, I was leading my own team. The work was demanding travel, deadlines, clients. It meant I had less time for family. My weekly calls with Grandma stayed, but they weren't the long talks we once had. Whenever I asked how she was doing, she always gave the same cheerful answer. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Everything's okay here. Nothing to worry about." But I could tell something was off. Her voice sounded less lively than before. Her stories became shorter, less detailed. When I asked about family dinners or events, she'd brush it off with vague answers like the usual routine or nothing special. And then one day, she mentioned something that shook me. She said she had moved to a different room in the house. When Grandma first told me about the room change, I didn't think much of it. She explained it so calmly, almost like it was no big deal. "Your mother thought it'd be better if I moved closer to the laundry room," she said. "Sophie needs more space now that she's older." They turned my old room into part of her suite. Her voice was steady, but something about it made my chest tighten. That room had been her sanctuary, filled with light from the big windows and decorated with things she loved. Now she was in what used to be a storage spacer. Small, dark room with one tiny window that looked out at the neighbor's brick wall. You comfortable there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's cozier," she said after a pause. "At my age, I don't need much space." I wanted to push harder, but she quickly changed the subject, talking about her garden and asking about my work. Later, she mentioned that some of her belongings had been stored away in the attic for safekeeping. She listed them casually, like they weren't important: her vintage books, her photographs, even the quilt her own mother had made for her. But I knew those things weren't just objects. They were her memories, her history. I told myself I'd ask more questions next time, but I didn't. The first real red flag came the following Thanksgiving. I called home, expecting Grandma to answer. Instead, Victor picked up. "Where's Grandma?" I asked. "She can't come to the phone right now," he said sharply. "She's resting. The day's been tiring for her. Can you please wake her? I just want to wish her happy Thanksgiving." "That wouldn't be wise," he replied. "At her age, uninterrupted rest is important. I'll tell her you called." 3 days later, when I finally got to speak with her, she sounded quiet, almost small. She told me she had eaten her Thanksgiving dinner in her room, alone, because it was more comfortable that way. She added that my parents had company over people I wouldn't know. It didn't sit right with me. Grandma had always loved being part of family gatherings. Why would she suddenly prefer to eat alone in a tiny room? Over the next year, I tried visiting 3 separate times. Every single trip was blocked by excuses from my mum or Victor. The first attempt was around Easter. I had already booked flights and told them weeks in advance. Just 2 days before my trip, Mum called me. "Sweetheart, Grandma has a bad cold. It'd be terrible if you caught it and couldn't work. Better to wait until she's better." When I said I didn't mind risking a cold, Victor took the phone. "We've already made plans for the weekend, assuming you wouldn't be here. It'd be inconvenient to change things now." The second time was for Grandma's 83rd birthday. Mum told me they were taking her on a surprise trip to Florida to visit her sister. It made sense. Grandma had always wanted to go, but when I asked her about it a week later, she was confused. "What trip, dear? I haven't been anywhere." When I pressed, she quickly backtracked, saying it had been postponed. She sounded nervous, like she didn't want to say the wrong thing. The third time, I didn't even tell them I was coming. I wanted to surprise Grandma for Thanksgiving. But then my flight was cancelled because of a snowstorm, and I couldn't rebook in time. When I called her that holiday, she sounded more distant than ever. Our conversation was filled with long pauses, and twice I heard someone walk into her room. Each time, her voice dropped to a whisper. "Grandma, are you okay? You can tell me." "The truth," I said gently. She hesitated for a long time before finally saying, "Life changes as we age, Melissa. Some adjustments are harder than others, but I'm managing." Then, in a softer voice, almost like she was afraid someone would hear, she added, "I miss our talks in person." Those words haunted me. That December, I made a decision. Enough. Excuses, enough waiting. I asked for 2 weeks off over Christmas, determined to see her with my own eyes. I didn't tell anyone, not Mom, not Victor, not Sophie. I booked a flight and rented a car so no one could interfere. Deep down, I knew something was very wrong, and I needed to be there. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, it became harder to reach her. My calls often went unanswered, and when she did pick up, the conversations were short and interrupted. She sounded tired, weaker than before, and sometimes struggled to keep track of what we were talking about. The last time I spoke to her before my trip, she whispered something that sent chills through me. "If anything ever happens, remember my ring. I kept it in the blue jewelry box. It should go to you." "Grandma, why are you saying this?" "Nothing's going to happen," I said, panicked. "Just in case," she murmured. "Just in case." That was the last time I heard her voice before I drove home on Christmas Eve. The town looked magical. That night, houses glowing with holiday lights, people gathered inside with their families. But inside me, there was only dread. My rental car's thermometer blinked 31 degrees Fahrenheit, as I turned onto the familiar street where I grew up. The big colonial house stood there, covered in sparkling Christmas lights. The window revealed the tall Christmas tree, decorated in Mum's fancy silver and blue theme. I parked across the street, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the cold night. My breath fogged the air as I hurried up the walkway. That's when I saw movement on the porch. At first, I thought it was a decoration, but then it shifted again, and I froze. There, sitting hunched on the bench near the door, was a small figure in a thin sweater and pajama pants. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, her body shaking. "Hello," I called out, moving closer. "Are you okay?" She lifted her head, and my heart stopped. It was Grandma. Her face was pale, her lips blue, her silver hair, once neatly styled, hung limp around her face. She was trembling so violently that her body rocked back and forth. "Grandma," I gasped, rushing forward. "What are you doing out here?" She looked at me with confused eyes, unfocused. Through chattering teeth she managed one word: cold. I stripped off my coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, kneeling beside her. Her skin felt like ice. Up close, I saw how thin she had become. She wasn't the strong, vibrant woman who raised me. She looked fragile, breakable. "Grandma, it's me, Melissa," I said firmly, holding her frozen hands. "How long have you been out here?" Recognition flickered in her eyes, and then tears spilled down her cheeks. "Melissa," she whispered. "You came?" "Of course I came," I said, fighting back tears. "Why are you out here? Where's everyone else?" Between shudders, she explained. She had been helping set up for the party earlier. While carrying a pitcher of water, her hand shook arthritis and she spilled some on the tablecloth. Victor had yelled at her, called her useless, said she ruined Christmas Eve dinner. Mum agreed. They told her to go to her room, but then Victor came back, sneered at her, and told her she should cool off outside until she could act properly at a formal event. "How long ago was that?" I asked, my voice shaking with fury. "The sun was still up," she whispered. I checked my watch. Sunset had been around for 30. It was past 8 now. She had been outside for at least 3 hours. Maybe longer. I helped her stand. She was so light, it scared me. As I supported her, I looked through the window. The party was in full swing. Mum, dressed in a red cocktail dress, was laughing as Victor poured her champagne. Sophie was perched on the couch, entertaining guests. Not one of them had bothered to check on Grandma freezing outside. Something inside me broke. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was cruelty. Cold, deliberate cruelty. And I knew then if I hadn't come when I did, Grandma could have died out there while they drank and laughed. "Can you walk?" I asked her softly. "Not fast," she whispered. I didn't wait. I bent down, lifted her into my arms, and carried her toward the front door. She weighed almost nothing, trembling against me. As I reached the door, guests inside began to notice. Faces turned toward the window. My cousin Mark's eyes widened, and he nudged Aunt Linda. One by one, the room fell silent. Victor's smile faded into shock, then fear as he saw me. I stopped at the door. It was locked. They hadn't just sent her outside, they locked her out. I rang the doorbell, rage burning in my chest. Footsteps approached, and then the door opened. Mum stood there, her fake party smile frozen. Her eyes darted between my face and Grandma's. Frail body in my arms, "Melissa, what are you doing here?" she stammered, blocking the doorway. I didn't answer. I looked her straight in the eye and said the 6 words that had been boiling inside me since I found Grandma outside. "How could you do this to her?" The room went silent as my words cut through the party noise. Guests who had been laughing and sipping champagne now stood frozen. Their eyes locked on me and the shivering woman in my arms. Behind my mom, Victor appeared, his expression twisting. from confusion to anger as he realized what was happening. "This is a private party," he snapped. "Helen was just getting some air." "Some air," I repeated, my voice rising. "She's been outside for hours in freezing weather, with no coat, no blanket, nothing. She could have died out there." Without waiting for permission, I pushed past my mom and stepped into the warmth of the living room. The difference in temperature was like night and day, making me realize just how dangerous it had been for Grandma outside. The guests parted as I carried her straight to the fireplace. I gently placed her in the armchair nearest to the flames, keeping my coat wrapped tightly around her. Her body still shook violently. "Someone get me a blanket," I ordered. For a moment, no one moved. Then my cousin Mark rushed off and came, back with a thick quilt. I tucked it around her shoulders, brushing her icy hands with mine. Victor stormed closer, his face tight with anger. "Melissa, you're making a scene. This is unnecessary. Your grandmother was just asked to step outside. For a short time. She knows she could have come back in whenever she wanted." "She did knock," I shot back. No one answered. The music was blasting, and all of you were too busy celebrating to notice an 83-year-old woman freezing to death on your doorstep. Mum tried to smooth things over, her voice sickly sweet. "Honey, I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. Mum's been getting confused lately, forgetting things. She probably forgot she could use her key to come back in." I stared at her in disbelief. "What key, Mum? The doors are dead-bolted from the inside. Even if they weren't, are you really saying it's fine to punish her by leaving her outside in the cold? What is wrong with you?" The guests shifted uncomfortably, some glancing at each other, others inching toward the door as if they didn't want to be part of this anymore. Victor raised his voice again, trying to sound reasonable. "You don't understand, Melissa. Your grandmother has been difficult. Always underfoot, always making messes. Tonight was just the last straw. That tablecloth she ruined has been in my family for generations." I blinked at him, stunned. "You left her to freeze over a tablecloth?" Grandma stirred then, her voice weak but steady. "It isn't just tonight, Melissa." Her hands trembled as she clutched the quilt. "Things changed after you left. For college, they moved me to that tiny room by the laundry. They took my things, said they were clutter. My books, my photographs, even the quilt my mother made." Her words trailed off, and I leaned closer. "What else, Grandma? Tell me." "Everything." Her voice cracked as she went on. "They don't let me eat with the family anymore. Most nights, I eat alone in my room. Small portions. Leftovers. When I said I was hungry, Victor told me women my age should watch their weight." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "They took my phone 6 months ago. Said I was making too many calls, running up the bill. I can only use the house phone when they say so, and they always listen." The weight of her words hit me like a punch. My stomach churned. I'd believed her excuses about the broken cell phone, never realizing the truth that they had taken it to cut her off from me. Victor stepped forward, his voice hard. Those were necessary boundaries. "She's become too dependent, too demanding. We had to take steps." "Steps," I spat, my anger boiling over. "You mean control? Isolation? Abuse?" I pulled out my phone and held it up. "You know what? I've been recording this whole conversation. Every word, every excuse. You just admitted to elder abuse in front of half the family." That was a bluff, but as soon as I said it, Victor lunged for my phone. I quickly hit the record button for real and stepped back. "Touch me," I warned loudly enough for the guests to hear, "and I'll add assault to the charges." He froze, glancing around at the watching eyes. Some guests looked horrified, others guilty, and a few nodded as if they'd suspected something was wrong all along. My Aunt Linda spoke up, her voice soft but steady. "I noticed Helen had lost a lot of weight. When I asked Caroline about it, She told me Helen was on a special diet. I should have known better. That wasn't a diet, I said bitterly. That was starvation. Mum finally snapped, her voice trembling. You have no right to come in here and accuse us like this. You've been gone for years, chasing your career, while we've been the ones taking care of her, day in and day out. Taking care of her. I laughed bitterly. You call locking her outside in freezing weather care. Taking away her possessions, her phone, her dignity. That's not care, Mum. That's cruelty. Grandma, her voice shaking, reached into the small drawer of the end table beside her chair. She pulled out a folded paper with trembling hands and passed it to me. It was a bank statement. Her pension had been going in, but no withdrawals for almost a year. Victor manages my money now, she whispered. He said it was better with my memory not being what it used to be. If I need something, I have to ask. Most of the time, he says no. My blood ran cold. Financial abuse. They hadn't just isolated her, they were stealing from her too. Enough, Victor barked. Helen agreed to this. She signed the papers willingly. Did she? I demanded. Or did you manipulate her into it? Because it looks a whole lot like exploitation to me, and that's a crime. For the first time, Sophie stepped forward. She looked pale, her voice shaky. Dad, is this true? Have you been taking Grandma's money? Victor's face turned red. Stay out of this, Sophie. You've benefited plenty from it yourself. The room gasped. Even Mum looked shocked at that slip. I turned back to Grandma, who looked stronger by the second as the warmth of the fire began to thaw her body. We're leaving tonight, I said firmly. I'm taking you somewhere safe. Victor blocked the doorway. You can't just take her. She lives here. She's legally under our care. I held up my phone. I'm recording everything. From this point on, every threat, every attempt to stop us. You try to keep her here, and it'll be on the record. The guests, still gathered in the room, whispered among themselves. Their presence gave me courage. They weren't just witnesses to what had been happening. They were witnesses to what was happening now. Mum, I turned to Caroline. Are you really going to stand there and let your husband abuse your own mother? Because that's what this is, abuse. And it's a crime. Her face cracked, the mask slipping. We've been caring for her, she insisted weakly. Caring for her. I echoed, by locking her in a storage closet, by taking her money, by punishing her like a child. The room was silent, except for Grandma's shaky breathing. Finally, she lifted her head and spoke, her voice filled with quiet power. Melissa. They took more than my money. They took my independence, my freedom, but not anymore. She looked at me, her blue eyes shining. Take me out of here. And in that moment, I knew I wouldn't leave without her. The silence in the room was so heavy you could almost feel it pressing down. All eyes were on me, on Grandma, on the truth that was finally spilling out after years of being hidden. I bent down and whispered, Grandma, what do you need tonight? What can't we leave behind? Her voice was soft but steady. Go to my room first, you'll see. So I followed her instructions. When I stepped into her so-called room, my stomach dropped. It was nothing more than a converted storage closet. The walls were bare. The ceiling had a single bulb hanging down, and the bed was a narrow twin mattress shoved against the wall. Heavy drapes covered the tiny window that looked straight into the neighbor's brick wall. This wasn't a bedroom. It was a prison cell. I felt rage boil inside me as I looked around. This was how they treated her. After everything she had done for our family. Bring the bag from the closet, Grandma whispered. There are photos I saved. Not many, but some. I grabbed the small box and opened it. Inside were a handful of old photographs, her wedding picture, my school photos, faded snapshots of family holidays. These were the scraps she had managed to protect when they had stripped her of everything else. With Aunt Linda's help, I packed a little bag carefully. Then Grandma whispered again, "My jewelry box, the blue one. Your grandfather gave it to me. Sophie has it in her room." I marched down the hallway and knocked on Sophie's door. She looked startled but didn't argue. Without a word, she disappeared into her room and came back holding the ornate blue box. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I didn't know how bad it was," she muttered. "Dad said Grandma gave these things to me as gifts. I thought it was true." She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a gold locket. This was hers too. "I'm sorry." I took the box and the locket, my voice cold. "If you're really sorry, then tell the truth about what's been happening here. Don't cover for them anymore." Back in the living room, Victor was on the phone, whispering urgently. I caught fragments. Family matter, confusion, don't overreact. He was already trying to spin the story. "I'm calling the police," I announced loudly, pulling out my phone and Adult Protective Services. "This is elder abuse, and it ends tonight." Victor snapped his phone shut. "That's unnecessary. We can handle this as a family." This stopped being a family matter the second you locked an elderly woman outside in freezing weather. I shot back, dialing 911. The dispatcher answered, and I reported everything clearly. The immediate danger to my grandmother, the neglect, the financial control, the isolation. They promised to send both police and paramedics right away. While we waited, I turned to Victor. "Where are Grandma's legal documents? Her ID, her financial papers?" His jaw tightened. "They're in my office, for safekeeping." "Safekeeping," I repeated bitterly. "Or control?" The guests were still standing around, uneasy but watching. "Open it," I demanded. "That's private," he snapped. "You have no right. My grandmother's documents are not your property. Either open it now or explain to the police why you're hiding them." Under the weight of so many eyes, he finally unlocked his office. Inside, I went straight to the safe. "Open it," I said again, with obvious reluctance. He did. And just like I feared, it was filled with Grandma's most important papers: her passport, Social Security card, insurance policies. There was also a folder of financial records, including power of attorney papers with shaky signatures that didn't look like Grandma's at all. And then, at the very bottom, I found something that made my stomach twist. A deed transfer. It showed that Grandma's small house, the one she had kept even after moving in with us, had been signed over to Victor and my mum just 6 months earlier. For $1. I held up the paper. "You stole her house. She wanted us to have it," Victor insisted. "She didn't want the hassle of managing it anymore." Grandma shook her head fiercely. "That's a lie. I never agreed to sell my house. That was my safety net, my independence. They tricked me." I photographed everything with my phone, my hands shaking with anger. "These signatures will be examined by a handwriting expert, and if they're forged, you're looking at felony charges for financial abuse." At that moment, the doorbell rang. The police had arrived. 2 officers stepped inside, accompanied by paramedics. The room went dead silent. I quickly explained what happened, showing them the documents and pointing to Grandma in the armchair. The female sergeant crouched beside her, speaking gently. The paramedics took her vitals and confirmed what I already feared: mild hypothermia, dehydration, and signs of malnutrition. "She needs medical care immediately," one of them said. "I'll take her," I insisted, "but please document everything." The sergeant nodded, pulling out her notebook. "We'll be taking statements tonight. If your grandmother wishes, we can file charges right away, and we can get an emergency protective order to keep her safe." For a moment, Grandma stayed quiet. Then, with surprising strength, she straightened her back and said, "I want to press charges. Not just for me, but for anyone else suffering in silence." Her words hit the room like thunder. My mum's face crumpled. For once, Victor had nothing to say. Grandma turned to my mum, her voice steady. "Caroline, I gave you everything, my love, my trust, my support. And this is how you repaid me. I forgave many things over the years, but this I cannot forgive. Until you truly understand what you've done, I cannot call you my daughter." Mum collapsed into a chair, pale and shaking. Victor tried to comfort her, but she pulled away. Finally, seeing the man beside her for who he really was, I turned to the guests. Elder abuse thrives in silence. Tonight, you all saw what's been happening here. If you see an elderly person becoming isolated, losing weight, losing their voice, don't ignore it. Ask questions. You could save a life. Several nodded, and Aunt Linda stepped forward. "I'll be a witness," she said firmly. "I've seen the changes. I should have spoken sooner." 2 more relatives agreed. For the first time all night, I felt a glimmer of hope. We gathered Grandma's most precious belongings, her photographs, her jewelry, her documents. Sophie quietly handed me the last of her things, guilt written across her face. When the paramedics prepared to leave, I helped Grandma to her feet. She was weak, but standing tall. "We're leaving this house tonight," I told Victor. He tried. "One last time. She's legally a resident here. You can't just take her." I looked him square in the eye. "Try to stop us, and you'll be doing it in front of the police. Every second of this is being documented." For once, Victor backed down that as we walked out into the cold night, Grandma clutched my hand tightly. She glanced back at the house, lit up with perfect Christmas lights. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "I never thought my own family would hurt me more than any stranger." I squeezed her hand. "You have a different family now, Grandma. One that will never let you down again." That night, after everything that had happened, I helped Grandma into the back of the paramedics' van. But instead of sending her off to the hospital alone, I told them firmly, "I'm going with her." The officers nodded, saying they'd follow up soon. Grandma looked at me, her eyes tired but still full of trust. I squeezed her hand as we drove away from the house that had become her prison. But when we arrived at the hospital, the waiting room was packed. It was Christmas Eve. The paramedics said her vitals were stable enough for her to be treated later. That night, or early the next morning, I didn't want her sitting in that cold, sterile place for hours. So, I made a decision. I checked her into a nearby hotel. The night manager, after hearing our story, immediately stepped in to help. He brought US extra blankets, hot tea, and even arranged for food to be sent up to our room. For the first time in years, Grandma was in a space where no one could control her. No one could silence her. She curled up in the bed, sipping hot tea with shaky hands. I sat beside her, watching as color slowly returned to her cheeks. "I thought I was dreaming when you showed up," she admitted softly. "I've dreamed of you coming back so many times." My chest ached. "I should have come sooner, Grandma. I should have known something was wrong. I'm so sorry." She shook her head weakly. "No, child. I hid it from you on purpose. I didn't want to weigh you down with my problems. You had your own life. You raised me," I reminded her, my voice breaking. "You were always there for me. Taking care of you could never be a burden." That night, while she rested, I sat awake. In the chair beside her bed. Outside the window, snow was falling, making the world look like a postcard. But all I could think about was how close I had come to losing her. If I hadn't shown up when I did, she might not have survived. When she finally drifted off to sleep, her breathing soft and steady, I promised myself something. I would never let her suffer like that again. The next morning, Christmas Day, I started making calls. First, I reached out to an old high school friend who had become a geriatric nurse. Even though it was a holiday, she came straight to the hotel. She gave Grandma a thorough checkup and confirmed what the paramedics had said: mild hypothermia, dehydration, and signs of malnutrition. But she also noted something else: emotional trauma. She needed time, patience, and maybe even counseling. She told me quietly. Later that day, I called another friend from college, this one a lawyer specializing in elder law. She referred me to a colleague in our hometown who handled elder abuse and financial exploitation cases. I set up a meeting immediately. I also called my boss in Chicago. I explained the situation, half expecting resistance when I asked for extended leave. But instead, she surprised me. "Family comes first," she said without hesitation. "Take the time you need. We'll adjust your workload for remote work later. Focus on your grandmother right now." Her words lifted a huge weight off my shoulders. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had room to breathe. That afternoon, there was a knock at the hotel door. When I opened it, Sophie was standing there. Her eyes were red from crying, and she carried several bags in her hands. "I brought Grandma's quilts from the attic," she said quietly, "and some photo albums. I also found these hidden in Dad's closet." She handed me a small box. Inside were Grandma's wedding ring and several heirlooms we'd been told were lost. Stared at her, unsure what to say. She shifted uncomfortably. "I knew things weren't great for Grandma," she admitted, "but Dad always had explanations. He said she needed supervision because of memory problems, that she needed a special diet, that the smaller room was safer." I wanted to believe him. "Did you ever question him?" I asked sharply. She lowered her eyes. "Not enough. I was busy with school, then work. It was easier to accept his version of things." Grandma stirred from the bed, then her eyes softening when she saw Sophie. "Come here, child," she whispered. Sophie hurried to her side, kneeling beside the bed. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she said, her voice cracking. "I should have spoken up. I should have been braver." Grandma touched her cheek gently. "You can start now." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a chance for Sophie to begin making things right. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. The lawyer helped us file for emergency guardianship, so Victor couldn't touch Grandma's finances anymore. We also reported everything to Adult Protective Services and gave the police the documents I had photographed. Detectives began building a case, interviewing witnesses from the Christmas Eve party. Meanwhile, Grandma went through a full medical examination. The results were sobering. Beyond malnutrition and dehydration, she had untreated arthritis, vitamin deficiencies, and muscle loss from being confined to that small room. Worse, she was showing signs of depression and anxiety from the years of isolation and abuse. "These symptoms are common after prolonged neglect," the doctor explained. "The good news is that with proper care, many of them can improve significantly." Hearing that gave me hope, but it also made me furious all over again. My grandmother, who had once been so strong, so full of life, had been reduced to this because of people who were supposed to love her. I decided then that I wasn't just going to protect her, I was going to fight for her. While the legal process unfolded, I focused on creating a safe, comfortable space for her. My apartment in Chicago was too small for both of us, and I wanted her close to good doctors. So, I found a 2-bedroom apartment in a senior-friendly community near the hospital. The moment I walked in, I knew it was perfect. Bright, spacious, warm, a place where Grandma could finally feel at peace. By New Year's, we had moved in. I brought some of my furniture from Chicago and filled the rest with pieces from Grandma's things. When she saw her favorite quilt on the bed and her old photographs hanging on the walls, her eyes filled with tears. "It feels like I can breathe again," she whispered. For so long, I felt like I was living in a fog, doubting my own memory. They kept telling me everything was fine, but it wasn't. I thought maybe I was going crazy. "That's gaslighting," I told her gently. "They made you question your own reality. But you're not crazy, Grandma. You were abused." She nodded slowly, as if letting the truth sink in. Maybe, but not anymore. Over time, I built a routine that gave her choices and freedom. She picked our meals, chose the activities for the day, and had full access to a new cell phone I bought her. I wanted her to feel in control again. The criminal case against Victor. And Mom moved forward. Victor faced charges of elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. Mom wasn't as directly tied to the money, but she was still charged with neglect and endangerment. Neither of them tried contacting us directly, though their lawyers sent messages trying to resolve things quietly. Our answer was always the same: full restitution and accountability. One morning in late January, Sophie showed up again. She had been visiting regularly, bringing more of Grandma's belongings and even offering information to the lawyers. But that day, she had bigger news. Mum left Dad, she told us. She's staying with Aunt Linda. She says she wants to see Grandma and apologize in person. Grandma sat quietly for a long time before finally shaking her head. "Not yet," she said firmly. "I'm not ready. Maybe one day, but not yet." Hearing that, I realized something important. For the first time in years, Grandma was putting herself first. She wasn't rushing to forgive just because someone wanted her to. She was setting boundaries, protecting her own heart, and that, I thought, was the first true sign of healing. By early February, life started to take on a new rhythm. For the first time in years, Grandma had a routine that wasn't built around someone else's rules. She was in control again, and you could see it in her face. In the way she carried herself, her health began improving little by little. Proper nutrition and regular meals put weight back on her frail body. With medication and therapy, her arthritis pain eased, giving her more freedom to move around. She began walking more confidently, her back straighter, her eyes brighter. The nightmares that had haunted her since those years of neglect still came sometimes, but not as often. And when they did, she wasn't alone anymore. I was right there to comfort her. I set up my apartment's spare room as her space, filled with her own things, her quilt, her books, her photographs. The more her world reflected her, the stronger she became. I also set up my home office so I could work remotely. My design firm had been surprisingly supportive, giving me the flexibility to care for her while still leading my team. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. But maybe the most beautiful change was seeing Grandma rediscover her passions. She joined a senior book club at the local library. She started a small balcony garden, growing herbs and flowers in little pots. And one day, she surprised me by saying she wanted to volunteer at the community center. When I asked what she planned to do, she smiled that familiar twinkle-eyed smile and said, "Teach baking, of course." So every week, she taught a small class, showing people how to make her famous pies and cookies. She laughed, she told stories, and she shared her recipes with the same love she once shared them with me. Seeing her like that, alive, engaged, valued, was the proof I needed that she was healing. She told me one evening, as we sat on the balcony together, "I forgot who I was for a while. They made me feel like I was useless, a burden, but teaching again, being needed again. It reminds me of my worth." "You've never been useless, Grandma," I said, squeezing her hand. "You've always been the strongest person I know." Meanwhile, the legal case against Victor moved forward. The evidence we had gathered, the fake signatures, the financial documents, the witnesses from the Christmas Eve party, was overwhelming. Eventually, he accepted a plea deal, admitting to financial exploitation and elder neglect. He received a reduced sentence, jail time, probation, and mandatory restitution. It wasn't as long as I thought he deserved, but at least he couldn't hurt Grandma anymore. Mom's case was more complicated. She hadn't forged signatures or directly stolen money, but she had allowed it to happen. She had ignored the abuse. She had looked the other way when Victor isolated and humiliated her own mother. The court gave her a lighter punishment, counseling, and community service instead of jail. Still, the emotional damage between her and Grandma was much harder to repair. Grandma wasn't ready to forgive, and honestly, I didn't blame her to Sophie, though she was different. To her credit, she kept showing up. She brought more of Grandma's belongings each time she visited, including things Victor had tried to hide away. She gave statements to the police and lawyers, admitting what she had seen. She didn't make excuses anymore. Instead, she listened. One afternoon, she came by with a stack of Grandma's old photo albums. As we flipped through them together, Sophie looked down at her hands and whispered, "I didn't know it was this bad. I thought Dad was strict, but I never realized how cruel he was being. I don't know how to make it right." Grandma studied her for a long time. Then she said softly, "The first step is telling the truth. Child, no more silence, no more pretending. Speak up when something isn't right." Sophie nodded, her eyes wet with tears. "I promise." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. By March, Grandma had settled into our new apartment. She had her routines, her hobbies, her classes. She had her phone back, calling friends freely without anyone listening in. Slowly but surely, she was reclaiming her life. But healing wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. Every week, we went to therapy together. The counselor helped Grandma process the years of gaslighting and control. They made me doubt myself, she admitted one session. I started to believe I was losing my mind, that maybe I really was the problem. The therapist nodded gently. "That's a common tactic abusers use. It's called gaslighting. They make you question your own memory, your own judgment, so they can control you. But the fact that you recognize it now is proof you're regaining your strength." Grandma sat straighter in her chair. "I feel like I'm finding my voice again." And she was. Around that same time, something surprising happened. Sophie started volunteering at the same community center where Grandma taught baking. At first, I thought she was doing it to look good, but then I saw her genuinely engaging with the seniors, helping them set up, listening to their stories. It wasn't about appearances. She was really trying. One evening, after a class, Grandma leaned over to me and said, "She's trying, Melissa. I can see it. She's young. She made mistakes, but maybe she's not lost." That was Grandma, always looking for the good in people. Spring rolled in, and life began to feel almost normal again. Grandma's health improved more with each passing week. Her silver hair, once dull, now shone in a stylish cut she had chosen during what she called her reclamation makeover. She started wearing bright colors again, clothes that reflected her personality instead of the drab, oversized sweaters she had been confined to. But more than the physical changes, it was the light in her eyes that told me the most. The sadness was still there sometimes, but it no longer defined her. She laughed again. She teased me again. She was Grandma again. As for me, I felt myself changing too. I had been so focused on my career before, climbing the ladder, chasing success, but now I realized what really mattered. Family, real family. The kind built on love and respect, not blood or obligation. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, Grandma reached for my hand. "You saved my life, Melissa," she said simply. I shook my head. "No, Grandma, you saved yourself too. You fought. You spoke up. You're the strongest person I know." She smiled softly. "Maybe, but I couldn't have done it without you. You reminded me that I still mattered." Her words stuck with me, because that was the truth. She did matter. She always had. A year later, Christmas felt completely different. Gone were the fake smiles, the cold house, and the cruel silence. This time, we were in our own home, a small 2-bedroom cottage we had bought together. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, filled with love, and every corner held a piece of Grandma's story. The smell of apple pie drifted through the kitchen. the same recipe she'd once taught me when I was a little girl. I watched her roll out, the crust, her hands steady now, no longer trembling with weakness. "Hard to believe how much has changed in a year," I said quietly. She looked up at me with a smile that reached her eyes. "From the worst Christmas to maybe the best," she said. "Life has a way of surprising us, even at my age." Her transformation was incredible. With proper nutrition, exercise, and medical care, her body had regained strength. She joined a water aerobics class at the community pool, took daily walks, and even attended yoga sessions for seniors. Her silver hair, once limp and dull, was now cut in a stylish bob that framed her face. She carried herself with confidence again, but the biggest change wasn't physical, it was in her spirit. Therapy had helped her process the trauma. Slowly, she stopped blaming herself and started reclaiming her sense of worth. She no longer saw herself as a burden. She saw herself as valuable, capable, and loved. She became an active part of the community, teaching baking classes, joining a senior support group, and even speaking publicly about her experience with elder abuse. At first, I was nervous for her sharing such a painful story with strangers. But she told me, if my voice helps even one person speak up, then something good has come from my pain. And she was right. My own life had changed too. After taking extended leave to help Grandma, my company allowed me to set up a small satellite office in our town. I managed a small team, which gave me the flexibility to stay close to Grandma while still pursuing my career. For the first time, I felt balanced. Sometimes I wondered if none of this had happened, would I still be chasing promotions, flying from city to city, forgetting what truly mattered? Maybe. But life had forced me to slow down, and for that, I was strangely grateful. Our family dynamics had shifted too. Sophie had been working hard to rebuild trust. She visited regularly, always respectful, always willing to help. She never made excuses for her father's behavior anymore. Instead, she listened to Grandma, supported her, and even volunteered at the senior center. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Grandma once told me she was young, Melissa, influenced by her father, but she's choosing to change now. That speaks to her character. And she was right. Sophie was no longer the spoiled girl who ignored what was happening around her. She was learning. Mum, though, that was different. After leaving Victor, she had gone through stages: denial, anger, guilt. The court had given her counseling and community service, but the damage between her and Grandma ran deep. They started with short, supervised visits. Over time, those visits became more relaxed, but trust was fragile. Grandma wasn't ready to fully let her back in, and honestly, I wasn't either. Healing that wound would take years, if it ever truly healed. Victor, on the other hand, had served 6 months in jail for elder abuse and financial exploitation. He was out now, on probation, making restitution payments as ordered by the court. He never apologized, never admitted the truth. We cut all contact with him, and that was for the best. The legal battles had gone in our favor. The fraudulent transfer of Grandma's house was reversed, and we sold the property to help fund our new cottage. Her pension and savings were returned, with additional compensation for emotional distress. For the first time in years, her finances were under her control again. But more than money, what mattered was her voice. She was no longer afraid to speak up, no longer silenced. That Christmas, we decided to celebrate with the people who had truly stood by us. Aunt Linda came, along with my cousin Mark and his wife. Sophie was there too, more humble but genuinely happy to be included. We also invited friends from the senior center and neighbors who had embraced Grandma as if she'd always been part of their lives. The house glowed with soft lights and the smell of homemade food. Nothing fancy, nothing staged for appearances. Just warmth, laughter, and togetherness. Before dinner, Grandma stood by the table, holding a glass in her hand. "A year ago," she began, her voice strong and clear, "I sat freezing on a porch, believing I had been forgotten. Tonight, I am surrounded by true family people who love me, respect me, and value me not for what I can give, but for who I am." Her eyes swept the room, glistening with emotion. "So tonight, I raise this glass to speaking up when we see injustice, to reaching out when someone is suffering, to remembering that family is not just about blood, it's about love and respect, and to second chances at joy at any age." Everyone lifted their glasses. The sound of clinking filled the room, followed by cheers and laughter. As I looked around the table, watching Grandma glow in the candlelight, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. A year ago, I had feared losing her forever. Now, here she was, stronger than ever, teaching us all what resilience really looked like. Later that evening, when the guests had left and we were sitting by the fireplace with mugs of cocoa, Grandma reached for my hand. "You saved my life," she said softly. "Not just that night, but in all the ways that make life worth living." I shook my head, tears in my eyes. "No, Grandma, you saved yourself. You chose to fight. You chose to keep living. You inspire me every single day." We sat there in silence for a moment, the fire crackling, snow falling outside, our hands clasped together. And in that moment, I realized something. What we had been through had changed us forever. It had taught us lessons we'd carry for the rest of our lives. That love without respect isn't real love. That family is defined by actions, not titles. That speaking the truth takes courage, but it brings freedom. And most importantly, that it is never too late to start again. Time has a way of moving on, but some moments never leave you. That Christmas Eve, when I found Grandma freezing outside, will stay with me forever. Not just because of the pain, but because of everything it taught us about love, about family, and about courage. In the months that followed, life slowly rebuilt itself into something stronger. Grandma kept growing, kept healing. She didn't just survive abuse, she rose above it. She became a voice in the community, speaking at senior centers, at local churches, even at town hall meetings about the warning signs of elder neglect. People listened to her, not out of pity, but out of respect. I remember one evening when she gave a short talk at the community center. She stood at the front of the room, her silver hair shining under the lights, her voice steady. She said, "They tried to make me invisible, but I am still here, and I will never be invisible again." The room erupted with applause. I cried quietly in the back, proud beyond words. Her story began to spread. A local paper interviewed her, then a radio station invited her to share her experience. Soon, she wasn't just healing, she was helping others heal too. Seniors came forward with their own stories, some for the very first time. Families reached out for advice, asking how they could better care for their loved ones. Grandma listened, encouraged and guided them, always with that gentle kindness that defined her. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about giving strength to others. Meanwhile, Sophie kept working to prove herself. She helped at the community center, drove Grandma to appointments when I couldn't, and even started taking classes in social work. One evening she told me, "I want to dedicate my life to making sure no one else goes through what Grandma did. I can't change the past, but maybe I can change the future." I believed her. Mom's journey was harder. She tried, in her own way, to repair the damage. She attended counseling faithfully, completed her community service, and wrote Grandma letters of apology. At first, Grandma didn't read them, but one day, she finally did. She didn't respond, but I saw the letter tucked into her Bible, folded carefully, that said more than words ever could. Whether forgiveness would ever fully come, I didn't know, but I knew healing wasn't about rushing. It was about letting wounds close at their own pace. As for me, I carried my own lessons from all of it. I used to think family loyalty meant silence, that you kept problems behind closed doors, that confronting the truth was too messy, too painful. But I had learned that silence is what allows abuse to grow. Silence is what keeps the cycle alive. Speaking up, that's what saves lives. That year, I started volunteering at the same senior advocacy group Grandma joined. I gave presentations on spotting signs of abuse, on the importance of checking in on elderly relatives. I even helped design flyers and websites for the cause, using my professional skills to spread awareness. And every time I spoke, I thought of that night Grandma's hand, a scald in mine, her body trembling, her voice barely a whisper, and then the firelight warming her face as she found the strength to speak the truth. That was the moment that changed everything. Now, every Christmas is different. Our little cottage glows with warmth, filled with friends, laughter, and the smell of Grandma's pies. We decorate together, hang stockings, and invite people who might otherwise spend the holiday alone. We've created a new tradition, one built not on appearances, but on genuine love and care. On the anniversary of that terrible Christmas Eve, Grandma and I sat by the fire, just the two of us. She looked at me, her eyes bright with tears. "Melissa," she said softly, "do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" I thought about it for a long moment. "I wish you hadn't suffered," I admitted. "I wish I had come sooner. But I don't wish away the strength it gave yours. Because now we know better. Now we live better." She nodded slowly, smiling through her tears. "Sometimes the darkest nights teach us how to see the stars." And she was right. That's what this whole journey had taught me. That even in the worst of times, there is hope. That even when family fails us, love can still be found in friends, in community, in the courage to start again. So if you take anything from our story, let it be this. Never ignore the quiet suffering of someone you love. Never assume silence means everything is fine. Pay attention. Ask questions. Show up, because sometimes just showing up can save a life. Grandma's life is proof of that. She was silenced, forgotten, pushed aside, but she refused to let that be the end of her story. She fought back. She found her voice again, and she taught me and everyone around her that it's never too late to reclaim your worth today. She is more than a survivor. She is a teacher, a guide, and a living reminder that resilience has no age. And as I sit here, telling you this story, I know one thing for certain. I will never let her be invisible again.